this is Jeff. How do we go about determining the age of a deer? And why do we even care? Now, there's plenty of folks that don't, and that's fine, but there's a lot of folks that do. And the reasons is because it can tell us so much about how we're doing on population management, how we're doing on harvest management, how we're doing on trophy management. And the harvest side, none of that data means anything if there's not an age to put it into context. But we still have to be able to determine those deer's age. Well, the tooth wear method has been used since the 1950s, was thought to be fairly accurate until some field observations kind of indicated, hey, this may not be so accurate. And then along came some scientific research, which also indicated may not be so accurate. Some good research, some not so good. Then along comes technology and the use of trail cameras, where a hunter can follow the same deer year after year after year after year. But that adds another level of complexity because that hunter has to also have the ability to now field age that deer in order to put into context the starting age when he first picked up the deer. And field aging, that's an issue all unto itself. And that's assuming they're following the same deer year after year also. There's a lot going on there. It's a kind of a convoluted mess. Well, I thought it was a good time to take a good hard look at tooth wear, field aging, trail cameras, research, and tie it all together with a big old bow of field savvy common sense. I sat down with some experts, a research scientist, a couple that own and operate their own high fence property in deep South Texas, a guy that manages a big corporate property, and a guy who is a professional hunting guide. All of them with over 20 years experience in deer management. And my name is Jeff Bonner. I have bachelor's and master's degrees in range science and wildlife management and over 30 years experience in both the public and private sectors. Now, I do hope you'll hang with me. I know it's a long video, it's not intended for Facebook attention spans, but there's a lot to unpack, and I want you to have the opportunity to hear all the interesting perspectives that our experts have to say, as well as to see the data, the research, and see how it all might fit together. Oh, and one more thing, I look forward to reading your comments, but please do watch the entire video before you comment, okay? And finally, thank you. Thanks for watching. And thanks for coming along with me.
Started working for a taxidermist and fell into guiding through that. Mostly Brady, Sonora, San Angelo, all around in that area, Menard. And then meet other people at South Texas ranches.
Al was involved in the forming of the chapter of the QDMA in North Texas. It was the Dallas chapter. So we're going back 20 years ago. So back then, these were actually physically cast from real deer jaws. The few people that I knew at the time that were involved in quality deer management, trying to age deer, they were all pretty much using the same method. They all had a old cigar box full of deer jaws. Sometimes it was complete, sometimes it was incomplete, sometimes the models were accurate, sometimes it was just the best they could do. And so we decided to make a prototype of each known aged deer jaw and put them on a ring. And that's how the idea was born.
I grew up in East Texas, went to Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, and was a forestry and wildlife major. I had an opportunity to go South Texas and be a deer person, so I took that opportunity. But yeah, so I stayed down there 18 years, Jeff, and then I had an opportunity, the ranch sold, had an opportunity to go back to East Texas where I grew up and manage another piece of property along the Natchez River. The first thing we did, we took records on everything, and without the proper age, you know, our records really didn't mean a whole bunch. You know, you're talking dressed weights and antler measurements, lactation rates.
I've been at Kingsville since 2004, and I've been a professor there since 2006. You know, really the only way to estimate age for deer and a lot of other big animals like that is we look at their teeth. Well, all of them were going to change from their baby teeth to their adult teeth, just like humans do. And that change is usually pretty predictable. Like for white-tailed deer, they're going to get rid of their last baby tooth, you know, between 1 and 2 years of age. And so we can tell one-year-old deer really accurately. You know, beyond that, what we're doing is we're looking at how much their teeth wear down. So, you know, the animals are chewing a lot, and over time that wears their teeth down. And so by how much their teeth get worn down, then we're estimating how old they are.
Now, hang with me here. For all this to make complete sense, it's important that we lay some framework. In 1949, a guy named Severnhouse published a paper in the Journal of Wildlife Management where they were trying to develop an objective way to determine the age of a deer based on the way their teeth wear down as they get older. Most of their efforts focused on measuring the height of the crest of the teeth, which no one uses that anymore. Rather, what has stuck is the relationship between dentine and enamel and how that relationship evolves over the years. All right, now this is not an instructional video. However, I did make one, and I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. In the other video, I will cover everything you need to know about how to age a deer based on tooth wear. Now, back in 1949, they were just trying to get a handle on how hard the hunters were hitting the deer population. That is, if all the deer came in were between the ages of 1 and 3, and there weren't hardly any middle or older age deer, that would indicate that the hunters were hitting the population really hard. And so for those purposes back then, tooth aging worked great. Then along came trophy management, and the hair splitting began.
You had to know if that deer was a 158 or a 161 because there was a big price difference. The more serious ranches where we were looking at score and age was a lot more critical, we looked at teeth a lot back then.
We want to make sure that we're harvesting deer during their best antler years.
Now, it's no mystery that bucks grow larger antlers as they get older, but nothing beats a good data set. With a large sample size from numerous trophy-minded ranches scattered across a large geographic region of Texas for a 12-year period. And what we see is that bucks will peak on average and based on tooth wear at 6 to 7 years of age. But if you get hung up on the exact years, then let's replace the years with the corresponding tooth wear. Now we can say that deer peak in antler growth when they have 1 to 2 dished out molars, regardless if that deer is 6 years old or 12 years old in reality. And like Chance and Courtney said, knowing the age of the bucks and when they peak in antler growth are important issues when it comes to killing big deer. But that brings up a problem because you can't look in their mouth before you shoot them.
Yeah, because that's one thing that we know for sure. Once he's been shot, I know exactly how old he is. As old as he's going to get. So you could always wait and shoot him later, right? But once you shot him, you can't unshoot him. Right?
Field aging became very popular in the 1990s and caught on like wildfire because hunters realized that it works like a charm. Now, I'm not going to go into all the particulars of field aging bucks as there are numerous high-quality charts, posters, and videos that you can go check out. But I do like good data sets. And here's our same data set that we looked at a few moments ago. But here we see the age distribution of the bucks those hunters harvested. And we can see that even without the heavy use of trail cameras, that hunters can become proficient at distinguishing an old deer from a not so old deer. But a research paper from 2014 revealed that aging deer on the hoof is fairly inaccurate at determining a buck's actual age. They tested 106, quote, wildlife professionals, end quote, by showing them trail camera photos of 70 different bucks of known age. Now, the term known age is very important. That means the bucks were captured and marked sometime during their first year and a half of life, when age can be determined by tooth replacement with very high accuracy. Now, the 70 bucks ranged in age from 1.5 up to 7.5 and older. And we can see how there would be a heated discussion around the campfire when looking at these 4 different bucks that were all known to be 3.5 years old. The researchers provided this excellent table that summarizes their data. The green diagonal shows the percentage of wildlife professionals that correctly estimated the deer's age. What we see is that not only were the participants inaccurate, they showed extremely high variability, especially in deer that were 3 years old or older. Now, that variability could come from 3 sources, or a combination of these 3 sources. And those are, 1, not all deer of the same age have the same body characteristics. 2, the body characteristics being analyzed are too loosely defined and highly subjective. Or 3, the participants have varying levels of field experience and or training. But we've just shown, based on this large data set, that hunters can pick out older deer in the field, even though not perfectly. Well, let's group the accurate percentages with the age of the next highest percentage, as in a plus or minus 1 year. And what we find is that percentages almost double in accuracy. Still not any better than a coin flip, but good enough to produce results like these. But how are you supposed to verify if you've learned a field age or not?
You know, in East Texas, it's even somewhat even more interesting because you can shoot a hunter is not after a huge trophy buck, lots of East Texas. It's catching on in East Texas, but you can shoot, you know, a deer can come in the check station and it's like a 115-inch 8-point, and I'm sitting there looking at it, and I was like, well, that's a 2 or 3 year old buck laying there, but I'll open his mouth and he'll be a flat, no teeth or anything. So it's hard to tell. It's really hard to tell, and especially when it comes to, you know, gauging by body size and all during East Texas, it's hard.
A guy wants to kill a big old deer. He's not real sure, though, how to evaluate whether a deer is old or not. There's plenty of videos, plenty of photos that you can go to educate yourself on that. But there's a difference between looking at a video and a photo and looking at some big old deer that's looking at you. And when the guy makes a decision to shoot it, when he decides, yes, I think that looks like an old deer, he wants some kind of confirmation to say, hey, I shot a nice old deer. Well, if he looks in his mouth, can he have any confidence in that?
We clipped along for a couple of years, and our goal there was to, in South Texas, that particular piece of property, we wanted to raise trophy bucks, okay? Some properties don't have that goal, but that was our goal. We had something to go on. We had trail camera pictures to look at him, to track his age, and we had sheds, which we thought we were pretty good at recognizing, okay? And you know that.
Yeah.
And then, so we would let him go as long as we could, and we'd finally harvest him, and we'd get up there to the skinning shed, and first thing, you know, take pictures, but then I just had to see what his teeth looked like. So I'd yank his mouth open, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I didn't even want to tell my boss that he looked like a 3-year-old in the mouth, you know.
Yeah.
Some of the more recent studies probably starting 15, 20 years ago, were kind of suggesting that, especially for older deer, maybe it wasn't as accurate, you know, to getting to a specific year. You could tell the deer was older, but telling a 5 from a 6, might not be real accurate.
I'm not going to go through all the research that's been conducted, but it has been extensive, and they have all pretty much pointed out that tooth wear isn't great at nailing down the exact years of a deer's life. One research paper in particular, using jaws and casts from known age deer, got a lot of attention. The researchers reported that 34 different, quote, white-tailed deer biologists, end quote, were good at correctly aging deer up to 1.5 years old. But for deer that were between the ages of 3 and 12 years old, the biologists aged only 22% correctly. But there was something else not discussed in the paper that I found far more interesting, and that was the wide variety of ages. You see, if two people who both have a full understanding of the tooth wear method are handed a single jaw, then they should both come up with the same answer. They may miss the deer's actual age, but their answers should be the same, or at most within 1 year difference. This is because the method attempts to remove as much subjectivity as possible. But when we look at the summarized table from this paper, we see a wide variety of ages. The yellow line represents the percentage of jaws that were aged correctly, and what we see around that line is very high variability. The group in red, particularly, would indicate biologists who probably didn't have a good, clear understanding of the tooth wear method, especially those who gave these answers, where fawns were aged as 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. I point this out because it demonstrates that some of the confusion with tooth wear likely stems from folks running around aging deer and training other people to age deer who don't really have a good grasp on the methodology.
Right. Well, but everybody has kind of their own little. Well, I look at the amount of wear on the last tooth because because that's the last one to be above the gum, and so if it's got some wear there, then that modifies what I think about these. Everybody kind of develops these things and
pass them on.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not saying any of those are absolutely wrong. They're just not consistent enough.
Right. Another problem with this paper is sample size. There were no jaws from the 7 or 8-year-old groups, and the 9, 10, and 11-year-old groups were represented by only one deer for each of those age groups. And a final critique on this not-so-perfect paper is that the tooth wear method stops at 8.5 plus. And the study only included those 3 deer that would have been classified as 8.5 plus. But I will say this, the paper also clearly demonstrates that the tooth wear method is not a good approach for nailing down the exact years of a deer's age.
I gave up on teeth probably 15 years ago.
So let's talk about some specific examples.
Well, we can start with this one.
Okay.
He's the easiest one to do. You'll see in the pictures, he had snow white ears, like they were dipped in paint. So we called him white ears. I've got pictures of him since he was a spike. He was a 10 point every year, the rest of his life. Little discrepancy on if the spike picture was taken in 14 or 2015. So we aired on the side of 2015. That would make him 8 this year. I can remember watching him as a spike, my boy sitting there, and he was wanting to shoot him because he liked his ears. And I said, son, you'll be in high school before that deer's old enough to shoot. And he's a sophomore this year. And
Sure enough.
Mm-hmm. And I sent you a picture of his jaw also.
You would say that happens how often? That you see that 3 to 4 year difference in between what you think the deer is and what his teeth show?
90%.
I believe that not all deer age by the book, but I would say 80% of the time the deer are within 1 to 2 years of what we believe they were on the hoof. I shot a deer this year, the one that I sent you pictures and the jawbone of, and we believe that deer was at least 10, and that was his best antler year ever. I had sheds on that deer that when you measure him, he's like an upper 170s deer, and that's why we didn't really think he was as big as he was. But in his later years, he started getting more and more non-typical and throwing more abnormals, especially like inside around the brow tines and inside of the main beams. He had like double row stuff going on that you couldn't necessarily really see from pictures. And he ended up putting on like 40 inches of abnormals at 10. And so that was his best antler year.
And he was also a ghost. I mean, we just didn't have a lot of photographic documentation.
Yeah, we would have shot that deer earlier if he had given us the opportunity.
And a loner.
What does he say?
Well, most people, if you go by the book or go by the model, it would appear perhaps 6 on one side and 7 on the other. But we know from history that that deer had to have been older than that. And not just 1 year, not just 8 or 9, possibly 10, possibly even 11.
But for our purposes, for age structure purposes, he was a very mature deer and harvestable.
Trail cameras have added a lot of insight into what's going on in the deer world. A hunter can now follow the same deer over multiple years.
There is no substitute for having history on your deer. All the field judging techniques and tooth wear, there's no substitute for having history.
We rarely ever kill a deer that we haven't seen before. We get tons and tons of pictures of all of them.
And then I'll put him in the book and log him as that deer, or if there's a question, I'll put a question mark by it. But then following up in deer season as we get further along and I am in the field more and taking more pictures and doing more observations, other things kind of make the clues, other clues come in that make it more obvious. So that's kind of my method for tracking deer from year to year.
And she has an amazing memory for deer. I mean, there's 400 deer on the ranch down south, and there's a number of deer here on the Hill Country Ranch, and Courtney has this way of remembering deer that
I can't
I don't
remember
frankly
people.
have.
I can't remember people's names or faces very well, but I can remember your dogs and your deer.
I've done it myself, or at least I believe I have. The scientist in me recognizes the risk of committing a logical fallacy. That's where I shift the burden of proof onto anyone who doesn't agree with me, as opposed to offering up evidence of my claim. That is, I say that this buck was 2.5 years old the first year he showed up on a trail camera. And that's based on what I interpret from the deer's body conformation. Now, we've seen from the harvest data that we looked at earlier that hunters can, generally speaking, pick out older deer from not so older deer. Yet the aging on the hoof research we looked at reveals how inaccurate field aging bucks can be. The problem is I have no way of verifying the age of this buck, nor can I offer any real evidence. You'll just have to take my word for it. I could send the photo to some buddies or post it on a hunting forum in search of support. However, as the research demonstrates, their guesses are as likely to be off base as mine. But nowadays, I can follow that buck over several years and follow his development in both body structure and antler growth, and possibly add validity to my previous claim. Which leads us to yet another potential logical fallacy, and that is, you'll have to agree with me or take my word for it that it's the same buck. Because I have no real evidence to provide other than annually corresponding body development. Anyway, I have photos of what I believe to be this same buck over a 5-year period. If he was a 2-year-old the first year, then he should have been a 6-year-old in 2015. And I would say that his body conformation would coincide with that age, but you'll have to take my word for it. Well, a hunter killed him that year, so now I have a chance to look at his teeth. While being fully aware of the potential inaccuracies of tooth wear, the teeth said the buck was 6.5 years old. Now, back then, it didn't occur to me that I'd be making a YouTube video on the subject, and I didn't save the jaw or get a photo. So, you'll just have to take my word for it.
So what would you say then to people like me, because there's going to be people like me who have different experience that would say that doesn't happen that frequently?
I would say you probably don't have the intimate history with the particular buck.
The individual deer?
Individual deer that we do. We will kill deer that we know are 10 plus, and their teeth show 5 or 6.
Most of the time, we're going to be within plus or minus a year. And as the deer gets older, it's going to be a little bit less.
Minus.
Yeah.
Right. That's important.
But with that being said, you know, there are some deer that, for whatever reason, their teeth don't wear down as much, and so they might really be 8 or 10, and their teeth say 5.
And it's not just me. I'm friends with some other ranches, Hill Country, South Texas, that have the same opinion, and we got there independent of each other. We didn't gang up and decide teeth are no good. We'll shoot one of these, like these two, 8 or 9, 10-year-old deer, and the teeth show 5, maybe 6. But the deer, if I just had somebody come out and sit in the blind, and this deer walked out, they're gonna say, "Oh, that looks like a 5-year-old," and shoot it, and the teeth show 5. So, in their mind, well, the teeth are spot on, and that happens a lot. But they don't have the history. And without that history, you really don't know. Without history or a tag in their ear since when they were a baby, you don't know.
It is interesting how long a deer can live if someone doesn't shoot him, and how trail cameras can document that. Case in point, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department conducted research on mule deer. They weren't attempting to determine anything about aging, but a nice side benefit was that some of the bucks were captured and ear tagged at 1.5 years old, then went on to live out their lives on a few ranches in the area. The hunters got to watch these deer grow up. Kind of makes you wonder how long bucks would live on large properties that's never hunted. And an ear tag is about the only evidence-based way to follow a deer over multiple years. And now, as if things weren't complicated enough, along comes Cementum annuli.
We found this lab that we could do Cementum annuli, annuli. And that was a big deal for us. We were like, okay, we're going to get perfect ages, and we're gonna get our deer data all in. And so we started sending, all our bucks we sent to get that done, and even some does we did it with. And I couldn't wait. I remember the first year I got them back, and I opened up the envelope to get and I looked at those ages, and I was like, wait a second, I've got pictures of that buck in sheds for 5 years, and I mean, they're saying he's 8. Something like that. And I'm like, wait, this isn't working. So, had a few that didn't look right. And so the next year, I would take 2 incisors and put them in a different envelope and send them back to see if I got the same age, right? And even some of those came back different.
If people really have some questions about aging, there are some of those commercial laboratories that will do that cementum analysis for you. That kind of method could give you a backup if you wanted to, if you wanted to kind of check one of these deer that, oh wow, we thought he was 10 or really old, but his teeth say he's not. You could check that.
All right, so on the Cementum annuli, I don't remember what the research paper was, but there was one that actually defined a parallel across the U.S. that said south of this line, Cementum annuli really doesn't hold together.
Right. Yeah, so that was kind of one of the questions is maybe, for northern deer, like, up in, Michigan, Wisconsin area, tended to put down really distinct rings. And then maybe the southern deer, it wasn't as clear. For the most part, the tree rings were good enough to use. Now, sometimes those would be really close together, and so they had a hard time distinguishing. So I guess the point is it's not exact, but it's better than in a lot of cases than some of the tooth wear.
I started communicating with the company, and where we were located in South Texas, same place you were, they realized that there wasn't a distinct winter. Okay, and like a tree, you count the rings on a tree because it's spring, winter, and so that process they hadn't perfected it yet. Okay, it was, and so we were kind of in a pilot program where we helped them. I know this is by pictures and sheds. Here, this deer is this old. I sent them a picture. I mean a tooth, right? And they could do that, and so they improved their process. Okay, and they were great. Hey, it was better than tooth wear. I knew that.
Now, hang with me. Fortunate for you and I, Dr. DeYoung recently participated in an outstanding research project that spanned over 15 years on hundreds of thousands of acres on the same deer herds with a huge sample size of deer that were captured during their first 1.5 years of life, providing known ages. They also considered soil types, everything from clay to sandy. They compared ranches that did and did not offer supplemental feed. And they compared tooth wear to Cementum annuli. So basically, the mother of all scientific deer aging research projects. Let's hear from Dr.
We
Dino.
were able to get a long-term research study together where we were capturing and putting ear tags in wild deer at young ages, at yearlings, and then retrieving the teeth and the jaw sets later on as they were harvested. And so it ended up being a couple of hundred deer, ranging anywhere from 2 to 8+ years old. And so that gave us kind of a set of, known age, deer to look at. And really just kind of looking at, how consistent are these patterns, one, and then two, could we make some adjustments to maybe better, reflect what we're seeing in terms of the age. And again, like I say, that what that was reflecting is that there's just a lot of differences between deer of the same age. Right. And so that's where, even if you're applying the technique properly, the deer don't always cooperate.
Now, in my 30-year career, I've hunted, guided hunts, and field-aged a lot of deer. And I've looked in the mouths of a whole lot of deer. And I've run across plenty of them that didn't bother to read the manual on how their teeth are supposed to wear. And while irregularities regularly occur, I have not found it to be a common thing where there are extreme differences between the expected age of a deer and its tooth age. Let's look at the summarized data from this research that included 254 jaws.
And I'm going to have to apologize to the researchers because I'm about to use their table in a manner they did not intend. And we're going to take some time to flesh this out as it says a lot. What they've displayed are all the different patterns of tooth wear that they encountered. And they've organized them beginning with the wear of the first molar, then worked their way down based on wear of the second and then the third molars, much like the normal tooth aging method. But what's great about this table is we get to see how few deer follow the manual. And we get to see how many extreme cases there are. Pause the video if you need to, because in the essence of time, I'm going to assume you follow the 1 through 5 criteria that's described for the molars. But this column is the sample size. That's 254 jaws that showed 20 different wear patterns. For example, there were 34 jaws that showed this type of wear on the molars, which is textbook wear for a 3.5-year-old deer. And here we see that there were 25 deer who were 3 years old who read the manual and followed instructions like good little deer. Here we see 4 deer whose actual ages were 1 year off from tooth wear. Now the term plus or minus a year actually means just 1 year, not 1 year above and 1 year below, which would encompass a 3-year possibility. Rather, it's 1 year above or 1 year below, encompassing a 2-year possibility. See, it's plus or minus 1 year, not plus and minus 1 year. That is, there may be judgment calls between a 4 and 5-year-old, but not between a 4 and 6-year-old. I'll point that out because here in a minute, I'm going to give you the percentage of these jaws that I would have accurately aged, and then a percentage that also includes those that were within 1 year. Also, it's important to point out the extreme cases where tooth wear was 2 years or more off from the deer's actual age, as in these 5 and 6-year-old deer whose teeth showed a textbook 3.5. When I talk about extreme cases, this is what I'm referring to. I also want to point out the nerds and weirdos who have no regard for law and order. I mean, look at the one at the top. That was a 7.5-year-old deer with teeth that would indicate 2 or maybe 3 years. Anyway, based on the written criteria for the molars, here's how I would have aged these jaws. Here would be the 2-year-olds, and the 3-year-olds, and the 4-year-olds, then the 5s, followed by the 6s, and then the 7s, and finally the 8+. Now, if you add all that up, I would have accurately aged 58% of the jaws. But if you include those that were within 1 year, then the percentage jumps to 81%. That leaves 19% as extreme cases where the tooth wear age was 2 years or more off from the deer's actual age. That sounds better for tooth wear and more along the lines of what I've witnessed during most of my career. When we look at the results from the researchers, it's obvious that I did not make some of the same judgment calls exactly like the researchers did, as they reported an 87% accuracy within 1 year. But hold on a second. Chance pointed out earlier that the extreme discrepancies that he and his friends have witnessed involved older deer. And Dr. DeYoung pointed out the same trend, that the older the deer gets, the more tooth wear tends to underestimate the age. So let's just look at the older deer, starting with the 5-year-olds. If we gather the older bucks into a group based on tooth wear plus 1 year, then 44 of them were aged accurately, with 22 of them being extreme cases where age was off by 2 years or more. So tooth wear was accurate within 1 year for 67% of the older deer. Okay, but what about the really, really old deer? Well, I placed only 6 deer into the 8+ age class. In reality, there were 20 bucks that were 8 years old older for an accuracy of only 30%. Now stick with me now. Here in a little bit, we're going to talk about what all that means in terms of management. In this same project, they also looked at Cementum annuli, and they found it to be accurate within 1 year, 93% of the time. But what about the older deer? Well, this table shows that it drops off some, but nowhere near as badly as the tooth wear.
You know, we figured out that a lot of these deer that we thought were 6, 7 years old, some of them are 10 or 11. Their teeth look like they're 6, but they're actually 10.
I still use both methods. I do. I'm a person that wants to keep learning, so I'll age them by tooth wear, and then I'll get back my results from the lab, and I'll correct those, if you will.
Although still not perfect, Cementum annuli allowed the researchers to evaluate any potential environmental influences on tooth wear.
Different regions of the country, there's some thought that, deer's teeth might wear down a little bit differently, different patterns of chewing, different plants. There's an idea that, whatever soil region that the deer lives in, like if it's in a sandy region, that they might be taking in some grit on part of the plants, and that might be helping their teeth wear down a little bit more.
In short, the influence of soil texture on tooth wear was no effect.
And sounds pretty reasonable is that, like some deer have access to a lot of supplemental feed, that maybe their teeth don't wear down as much because they're eating a softer food.
Interestingly, supplemental feed did have a statistically significant effect, but only because this study involved a sample size of over 5,000 jaws. So although feed had a statistically significant effect, it failed to move the age by 1 whole year. If your goal is to kill bucks at their peak antler years, we've seen how variable that can be based on your approach.
Some of the research information is showing, between 5 and 7 is usually going to be their peak, but some of these older deer can also have some good years as well.
For the most part, most deer, I would say 6+ are their best antler years. Within that range, I've had some that peaked at 6 and were down every year after that. I've had some peak at 7, and then we harvested them. And then I've had some that we didn't harvest at 6 or 7 that actually peaked at 8.
So with the Cementum annuli process, Jeff, we began to know that most bucks, not all of them, every deer's different. We finally figured out that deer were kind of maturing in South Texas within our program, supplemental feeding, at about 7 or 8.
We target ages 8 to 10 on what we consider a trophy deer. That's what we've seen when they do their best.
Don't be confused by all that, because the good news is that in reality, there's potentially a 4-year period where a buck could reach its peak. And based on the variability that we've seen among deer of the same age, we just can't predict when that might be. But if you shoot him, all possibilities end.
Just because they reach a certain age doesn't mean you have to shoot them. That's where a lot of guys go wrong on their lease.
You think he's 5 or 6? Well, he might get better next year. How long should we wait?
Just give him a couple years anyway, because that deer's not going to hurt. It's not going to really hurt to have him hanging around for another year. Well, if you shoot them when they're 130, you can't shoot them when they're 170. So that's where knowing your age structure and being able to field judge deer comes into play.
But I will say that it really does depend too on the region you're hunting in and how you can hunt, because I think we have the luxury in a lot of parts of Texas, we can hunt over bait, corn, something like that, so we can take a good long look at a lot of these deer before we shoot them. Well, you get some of our friends and colleagues that are like in the southeast or parts of the upper Midwest or Northeast, they can't hunt over bait, and they see a deer, they might just catch a glimpse going through this part of the forest and say, well, there's the next gap in the trees. Based on that 5-second glimpse, I got to decide whether or not to shoot this deer, and that's a lot tougher of a situation.
Okay, so you finally shot him and you want to know how you did. You can clearly see that if you want to know a deer's exact age, that tooth wear, field aging, and even trail camera history is not the way to do that. Cementum annuli is your best bet, but it can be a challenge and it comes with a price tag. Tooth wear, however, can be obtained immediately and easily. You just have to work within its limitations and not get wigged out if it doesn't nail down the exact years of a deer's life. In fact, accept that it does not.
but also accept that it is close most of the time. Keep in mind that some really good research shows that a deer whose teeth indicate that he is 6 years old could be 6 or 7 years old in reality, which is common. Or he could be 10 years old in reality, although less common.
Tooth wear is still an important part of my management plan. It's got to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would disagree that tooth wear is meaningless. I mean, I think it gives us a good, it does give us a pretty good indicator, probably good enough for management. It's not going to be exact, it's probably going to be that plus or minus 1 year if it's being used correctly.
We've looked at a lot of data, research, and multiple decades of observations from a wide variety of perspectives. Let's tie it all together with some functional common sense. I'll refer you back to this chart of harvest data from numerous free-range, large acreage ranches. Regardless of the deer's actual age, we know that when you look in their mouth and you see 1 to 2 dished out molars, that's teeth number 4 and 5, then those deer were killed at a time when they could reasonably be expected to have peaked in antler growth. But if you kill bucks year after year and they never have at least 1 fully dished molar, then that reveals you've still got some work to do. But you can do it. And when you look in a deer's mouth and see 1 or 2 dished molars, you'll have ground truth verification that you are growing old bucks and that you know how to identify them in the field. Whether by field aging or trail camera history or however, you've done it. Congratulations. And the last thing, but most important, far beyond big bucks and teeth and research, get out and enjoy God's creation. Immerse yourself in wild places and become a part of that natural system. Share it with friends and family. Live life and love life.
You're not looking fatter than you are. Suck in the gut. You want to do a whole nother take? I don't want to fart around that thing again. Too many videos? Oh. Okay. I'm getting where I don't care about aging deer. GoPro, stop recording.